The chill of early morning wrapped around Millennium Park as Daniel Harper adjusted his worn wool scarf and gazed at the icy glimmer of Lake Michigan. Most people rushed past, clutching their coffee cups, oblivious to the quiet suffering that lingered in the shadows of the city. Daniel had been walking these streets for over 20 years, teaching at a small, underfunded public school near the South Loop, and yet, he had never been more aware of the emptiness gnawing at the children he taught. Hunger wasn't just a word in a textbook for him. It was the hollow eyes of 12-year-old Maya, the shivering fingers of little Liam, the quiet resignation in the eyes of every child who came to school with an empty lunch bag. He had always been a man of modest means, living in a tiny apartment tucked away on a quiet street near Wrigleyville. Every penny he earned was already stretched thin, yet he found himself spending hours at the local farmer's market, buying bread and vegetables, cans of soup and fruit, all in secret. No one was supposed to know. To him, feeding these children wasn't charity, it was justice. It was the only thing that made his life feel meaningful amidst the relentless grind of unpaid bills, broken pipes, and the unending cacophony of city life. Every afternoon, Daniel would wheel a battered metal cart to the back alley behind the school, where a few children would gather quietly, drawn by the promise of warmth and sustenance. He never wanted them to feel pitied. "Eat first, worry later," he would whisper, his voice barely audible above the wind rustling through the trees of Grant Park. He knew the city would never applaud him, but that never mattered. It was enough to see the bright sparks of relief in their eyes, the faint smiles that surfaced like fragile petals against a stormy sky. But life in Chicago was rarely gentle. The winter that year had been brutal, biting through coats and scarves alike. And Daniel's own struggles were worsening. His apartment rent had doubled, his water heater was on the brink of collapse, and the school's budget cuts meant even fewer resources for the children. Still, he refused to stop. Each day became a test of endurance, a balancing act between keeping his own life together and secretly sustaining the fragile hope of the children who looked up to him like a silent guardian. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the towering skyscrapers and painted the lake in shades of crimson and gold, Daniel found himself walking along the lakefront trail, the wind carrying the faint laughter of families and joggers. He paused, letting the bitter chill wash over him, and silently prayed that tomorrow's batch of children would have enough to eat. His heart ached not just from the cold, but from the knowledge that no matter how much he gave, it might never be enough. Yet something deeper urged him forward, a stubborn, unyielding belief that even one warm meal could remind a child that someone, somewhere, still cared. Winter's grip tightened over Chicago, and Daniel Harper's small acts of kindness became harder to sustain. The local food banks were running low, the streets colder than ever, and every trip to the grocery store now felt like a gamble against the dwindling money in his wallet. Yet, despite the hardships, he never wavered. Each day, he reminded himself that the children who waited behind the school, hungry, shivering, and often alone, depended on him in ways no one else could see. It was during one particularly bitter morning that he first noticed the signs of suspicion. Principal Wallace, a stern man with a reputation for rigid rules, had begun questioning where Daniel disappeared during lunch breaks. "Mr. Harper, your absences are concerning," he remarked one day, peering over his thick-rimmed glasses. Daniel smiled weakly, saying he was merely attending to administrative duties, but the anxiety began to gnaw at him. If anyone discovered his secret, the consequences could be devastating, not just for him, but for the children he had sworn to protect. Meanwhile, the children's stories grew heavier in his mind. Little Mia, barely 8, had been coming to school with her shoes worn through and her lunch bag empty for weeks. James, a quiet boy who rarely spoke, told Daniel one afternoon that his parents had lost their jobs and sometimes had no food at all. Each revelation was a stab to Daniel's heart, yet it also strengthened his resolve. He began waking earlier, walking through the city streets of Chicago before dawn, gathering whatever he could find. Donated bread from local bakeries, cans from corner stores, leftover fruits from nearby markets. Sometimes he would sit on a bench at Millennium Park, the skyline glowing faintly behind him, and simply breathe in the cold, crisp air, thinking of how fragile yet persistent hope could be. The challenges weren't only financial. One day, a small group of older students discovered Daniel's metal cart behind the school and began asking questions. "Mr. Harper, why are you giving us food?" they asked, their eyes wide with curiosity. Daniel hesitated, the truth heavy on his tongue. "Because you deserve it," he finally said, his voice soft but firm. "Sometimes, people don't see the struggle around them. But someone has to care." The students nodded, some embarrassed, some tearful, and agreed to keep his secret. Their silent pact became a shield for the acts of kindness that unfolded daily in the shadows of Chicago's bustling streets. Yet, the cold reality of winter and financial strain meant Daniel was constantly calculating, balancing each small act with the limits of his resources. One snowy evening, he trudged back from the grocery store, his coat damp with melting snow, only to discover that his cart had been tipped over, the carefully packed meals scattered and partially ruined. His heart sank as he gathered the spoilt food, feeling the bitter sting of helplessness. But then, a small voice called out from the alley, "It's okay, Mr. Harper. We'll help." The children, despite their hunger and hardships, rushed to assist him, lifting cans and bread with tiny, trembling hands. The sight broke something inside him. The tears he had held back for weeks finally fell, streaming down his cheeks as he realized that hope, no matter how fragile, always found a way to survive. By early February, Chicago's winter had grown merciless. Snowstorms howled across Lake Michigan, coating Millennium Park and the streets with layers of white, while the wind sliced through Daniel Harper's coat and made his fingers numb. His small apartment felt colder than ever, the radiator barely managing to push out heat. Yet each morning, he forced himself out into the frozen streets, carrying his battered metal cart filled with meals for the children who waited silently behind the school. His determination had never faltered, but now he faced an obstacle that threatened everything he had worked for. One morning, Principal Wallace announced an unexpected inspection of the school premises by city officials. "All areas must be tidy and secure," he declared, oblivious to the quiet heroism happening behind the building. Daniel's heart sank. The alley where he distributed the food was cluttered with empty boxes and crates from previous days' deliveries. If anyone discovered the children gathering there, or the cart, his secret mission could be exposed, and he feared the backlash might prevent him from helping them ever again. The children, sensing the tension in Daniel's voice, offered to help. Little Mia, James, and the others worked alongside him, stacking boxes neatly, brushing snow off crates, and even carrying the cart into a more hidden corner behind a storage shed. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, not of despair, but of awe. "You're all braver than I could ever be," he whispered, his voice catching. Despite the bitter cold and fear of being caught, their loyalty and trust inspired him to push forward. That same week, a blizzard struck Chicago with unusual intensity. Daniel trudged through the snow, slipping and sliding along the lakefront trail, determined to deliver food to the children. Visibility was low, and his body screamed in protest, but he refused to stop. When he arrived at the alley, he found the children already waiting, bundled in tattered coats, their faces pale from the cold. The cart's wheels froze in the snow, forcing Daniel to pull it manually. Every step was agony, every breath a battle. Yet as he handed out the meals, the children's laughter rang out despite the storm, echoing through the empty streets and filling him with warmth stronger than any heater could provide. But tragedy struck that night. On his way home, exhausted and weakened from the storm, Daniel slipped on an icy sidewalk near Navy Pier, falling hard. Pain shot through his hip and back, and he barely managed to crawl into his apartment, bruised and battered. He knew he should rest, but his mind raced to the children who would wake hungry the next morning. The thought of leaving them without food even for a day was unbearable. That night, lying on his small bed, Daniel whispered to himself, "If I falter, hope falters. I cannot let that happen." His resolve was absolute, even as his body begged for mercy. The storm, the inspection, the icy streets, they were all powerful, relentless forces, but Daniel Harper's kindness refused to be subdued. And as he drifted into a fitful sleep, he didn't know that his actions, unnoticed by the city at large, were already planting seeds of gratitude and courage in the hearts of every child he had quietly fed. Spring arrived in Chicago, but Daniel Harper's battles were far from over. The snow had melted, revealing the familiar skyline of downtown, the green sprawl of Millennium Park, and the gentle ripples of Lake Michigan. Yet, even in the warmth of the season, Daniel's heart carried the weight of months spent feeding children in secret, battling exhaustion, poverty, and fear of discovery. He had given everything he had: time, energy, money, and hope, to ensure that no child went hungry. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the secret finally came to light. One of the children, unable to contain gratitude, told a parent about the meals. Rumors spread like wildfire, and by evening, Daniel found himself standing in the principal's office, the city officials hovering, reporters gathering outside, and neighbors whispering in the hallways. Daniel felt a familiar surge of panic. Would they scold him, fine him, or worse, prevent him from helping ever again? But something miraculous happened. Parents, students, and even strangers came forward, praising his selfless acts. They brought donations, warm coats, and food to ensure no child in his school went hungry. People who had once passed him on the streets without a glance now stopped to thank him, shake his hand, and offer help. Daniel's heart swelled with an emotion so profound it nearly brought him to tears. For once, the city that had seemed indifferent acknowledged the quiet heroism of a humble teacher who had never sought fame or reward. Yet amidst the joy, Daniel faced a painful truth. His own health had deteriorated from the relentless winter, the blizzard, and the countless nights spent worrying over empty stomachs. Doctors urged rest, warning that his body could not endure the strain he had placed upon it. And so, Daniel made a difficult choice. He would step back from active teaching for a while, entrusting the mission of feeding children to the very community he had inspired. The news was bittersweet, but he knew that hope, once planted, could flourish without him at the center. In the weeks that followed, the alley behind the school transformed. Volunteers lined up daily to distribute food, while the children, many of whom had once been hungry, cold, and forgotten, helped each other and welcomed newcomers. Daniel watched from a distance, sitting on a bench at Lakefront Trail, the gentle waves of Lake Michigan reflecting the sunset behind him. His heart ached with exhaustion, but it also radiated a quiet, unshakable pride. He had given the children more than meals. He had given them dignity, trust, and a vision of kindness that would ripple through their lives forever. And as the city lights shimmered across the water, Daniel Harper whispered to himself, "It was never about me. It was about hope. And hope is stronger than any storm." Sparkles, if this story moved you, please comment below and share it with your friends. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Quest, for more inspiring stories that remind us how one person's kindness can change the world.